Have you ever done a podcast about Modern Realty?
Just yours.
Okay, so my podcast is barely real. It's like a TikTok.
Hey. I mean, there's like, you have a Twitter page. I have a Twitter that's never tweeted. So like, that's more presence than like.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, and the reason I make those videos is because I want to share people's ideas that I think are interesting. And the reason why Caitlin asked you to do it, or told Omid to ask you on our behalf, was because Omid had mentioned that you guys were like back and forth on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And then I said, oh, what they're working on is really cool because the art of realtors is dying and this lawsuit just happened. Like, I just started like running my mouth about real estate and they were like, whoa, you seem really into this. Well, no, exactly. And so that's why they were like, oh, you should talk to him. So, but like the whole background there for me is really random, and it happened when I was basically a child. I started working for a realtor in my town when I was 16, and I was basically like his assistant. And the problem is I was in a small town. There aren't that many realtors, and my mom was like popular in my town.
Damn.
I know. She was really popular. She was very well loved. And she would refer me clients that then we would I would refer,
while you're 16.
While I'm 16.
Right.
That she would like refer me and my boss, who I'm like the glorified assistant of, clients, and then he would represent them in a transaction. And so,
do you have a license at that time when you're 16? Okay. Yeah.
So you cannot get paid in cash.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So you cannot get paid in cash for a referral. You can get paid in gifts. So I got random stuff like textbooks and like things for school. I was going to go to college, stuff like that. But you couldn't get paid like a check from a transaction for bringing in a referral. And you also couldn't host an open house. And so if I was giving a home tour, for example, I wasn't allowed to speak on like basically anything related to the features of the home, the price of the home, anything about the seller, like nothing. And so I found myself a lot in a situation doing like showings where I would be like carrying around the flyer that had all of the information. And then I would basically say, I'm not supposed to answer that question. You can refer to the flyer. Did I always follow those rules? No. And I think, the team and I were like, we'll just pay for you to get a license because then you won't be breaking any laws. And so the reason why I got a license when I was 17, I was a senior in high school, was because I wanted to be able to run an open house without needing supervision. And I was very good at those. I now have a full-time career in sales. It makes sense. I was selling, 3-4 bedroom houses in copy paste developments in my small town to people moving to Merced. And so I'm personable in that way. And they were like, it doesn't make sense for us to not allow you to have this option when you're obviously being helpful to our business by doing so. But I was never a seller's agent, buyer's agent. I've never represented anybody on an official transaction, but I've made referrals and I've done showings, open houses, and I had to take the test a couple of times.
I mean, your background is pretty typical for someone who is an agent in terms of being really personable and just getting your face in front of a lot of people.
Totally.
This type of dynamic is really common in terms of what type of person does this.
I've thought back to people that I know from my childhood and my hometown that have become agents full-time now, into our adulthood. And a couple of them, their parents were local realtors, so they sort of followed in the family business type of thing. And a number of them, I think you sort of find yourself maybe after getting a 4-year degree or going to community college and you're in a town where everybody's working class. It's kind of one of the only professions that feels like it has less limitations on how it can grow. And it's sort of easy to become. It's not hard to get a real estate license. It's maybe hard to become an excellent realtor. But the entry point is pretty low, which is why there's also a lot of shitty real estate agents. But I've seen a lot of people sort of get into the business because they feel like that's one of their options. I've also seen it happen in the mortgage and title space as well. So a lot of people from where I grew up kind of don't know what they're going to do with their lives after they finish undergrad or community college. And then they kind of look around and they're like, what are the most prosperous businesses in our small community? It's stuff that has to do with agriculture and then realtors, mortgage, title.
Right.
And that, or you have like a public service job, like you work for the county or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a ton of realtors that were like classmates of mine from high school, all still in our area.
It's one of the most common professions.
Really?
Yeah.
Like.
In the U.S.
Really?
3 million realtors.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's like, what, 1% of the
Yes.
population?
Well, you also have to understand, like, I'm sure you know this too, like, a lot of them have never done any deals, right? Like, a lot of them get it because they were thinking about doing their own house or something related to, like, a specific personal connection.
Sure.
And then they end up, like, not doing it.
Even still, 3 million licensed realtors seems like a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. And to reflect on it being kind of an uncapped growth business, that I think is like why people gravitate toward it as well, is because very rarely in a profession do you actually get paid on commission with no limit.
Right.
Usually it's like, well, let's take software engineering because my background is being a software engineer. Like if you get paid, let's say you get paid $100,000 and then 1 year you make the company $1 million extra dollars, you will get a raise to maybe like $130,000, you know, like, and then the year after that, you're not going to see any more of that delta.
So I'll give you an example in the context of software sales, which is a little more like this, in which there is a commission and there is ways to exceed your value. If you have 100% quota attainment, that means you hit your like on target earnings. So let's say you're on target
quota
earnings.
As in your quota for sales?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm a salesperson. This is hypothetical. I'm a salesperson. My base salary is $50,000 and my on target earnings, meaning if I hit 100% of my expected volume, I will make $150,000.
So it's like largely commission based.
Yes, exactly. And then if I achieve 100% of my quota and I go to 190% quota attainment, which is very common in software sales, then there are these things called like accelerators. And that's how you'll see people that work at places like Salesforce and DocuSign and LinkedIn that hit such large quota attainment specialties or like quarter over quarter, they end up getting paid $400,000, $500,000 a year because they've built sort of a book and they have really good leads and their accounts get bigger and bigger as they grow. So it's easy for them to sort of like repeatedly print money. And so I used to work at Palo Alto Networks, and in the sales organization, there were people that had been there for 11 years as ICs, never became people managers because they were just doing the same like commission-based sales sort of hamster wheel. And they never wanted, like they couldn't bring themselves off of it because it's really hard to say goodbye to that kind of money when it does feel limitless. Yeah.
And I think the similarity between that and the most successful realtors is very close in terms of all the most successful realtors have built a specific playbook on how to close business.
100%.
You know, and it's, you know, that first top of the funnel piece is getting in front of people. And, you know, that's open houses. That's a lot of different things. But then later down the line, everyone discovers that they need to convince you that they're good. Okay. And so I think the gap in the market here is that, you know, the people who complain to me the most have actually already just bought a home with a realtor. Okay. This is actually very annoying to do, like, potential customer calls, because I'm just like, okay, so you're like the least likely to buy a home in the near future because you just bought a house. So like that's annoying. But people really enjoy complaining to me at that time that they had a terrible experience, because basically the agent persuades you for a long period of time that they're good and they will give you the best service. And then they're actually incentivized just to transact as soon as possible and for as high of a price as possible, just based on their commission structure.
Right.
So they spend the least amount of time talking to you and they close the highest price possible. It's basically because they were getting incentivized by commission, they're basically operating with the same incentives as the seller to transact high and immediately. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to highlight with Modern Realty in terms of just like outlining this playbook that all of the realtors have fallen into, and how like we can have a better experience that's kind of outside this norm.
That's really interesting, which makes a lot of sense. Like optimizing for quickly and as high of a price. It seems obvious, but I think when you're a home buyer, that's less obvious.
Yeah, and there's a big difference in sales between, you know, your software sales and a realtor, in that for a realtor, it's like the transaction is done at the point of sale and there's nothing more they're supposed to provide, right?
Right.
You're actually advertising for someone else's product, right? So there's a very significant difference here. And that even though their like playbook may be pretty similar in terms of how they're trying to convince you that this is good, the realtor actually is not backed by anything, you know?
No.
They're just selling themselves.
Right.
And so like if you're at the point where you're unsatisfied with the house, that is the realtor's fault, whereas like they got you the whole way to the point where you selected that house. Whereas like if someone is dissatisfied with a software product, that is actually not really related to you at all.
Interesting that you think about it like that, but that makes sense. When you think about like realtors and how they've been involved in this type of transaction over time, like what do you think their significance is? Like how did they even, I don't know like the historical origin of real estate agents. Do you know anything about that? Like how did they even start happening? Why is it the most popular career?
So I'm loosely familiar with the origins.
Okay.
Seller agents existed first, and there were only seller agents. So in terms of, is it possible to interact with just one party having an agent? Yes, that's the way it was done. This is like a really long time ago. This is like on the order of 100 years ago, but there was just a one-sided agent interaction.
Crazy to think about, actually.
Yeah, I mean, people have been transacting property since like the beginning of
Time.
humans owning property. So
In biblical times, at least. Which who knows if that's like a textbook or not.
Yeah.
They would trade sandals as a way to signify like, I now own your land, give me your pair of shoes.
Right. Cows.
Yeah.
Daughters, you know.
Daughters
variety,
indeed.
Exactly.
Totally.
A variety of things. So in terms of like the history of property transaction, long history. In terms of the agent, on the seller side, more history. On the buyer side, I'm just talking about the United States now. On the buyer side, less history.
Interesting.
There was a different lawsuit, which I'll put on the screen right now. But there was a different lawsuit that basically allowed buyers to have their own agents for representation, which I think at that point used to be more fair because the property prices were much lower.
Right.
Property has been one of the fastest growing asset classes in terms of like the, you know, rate of increase in price per year.
Yeah, most resilient, I think, of any.
Yeah, because turns out have a lot of people on Earth. All those people want some land, and there's only a finite amount of land, and it's all already owned. So now we're in this situation. So like, I think it's time to challenge the traditional 3% to the buyer's realtor model, because there is no longer like this fair trade-off for like the amount of service that they provide for 3%. It's because the price of property has increased so dramatically compared to income that this percentage now means much, much more.
Is that why you decided to start building Modern Realty?
Yes, that is one of the reasons. I realized this, a couple of things, both the high price, the misalignment of incentives, like I was just saying, they're aligned with the seller's agent. And also, you know, I think I was looking for something that wasn't provided by any realtor service. I mean, I do like my realtor, actually, which is an interesting thing. We're friends.
That's funny.
But, like, there were just things that, like, realtors typically don't do. As in, for example, like, I bought a condo in San Francisco, in Japantown. And there was a 500-page HOA packet.
That's horrible.
Yes. So that included the information on, like, rental, pet policy, etc. So
Can HOAs control if you have animals?
Yes, they can. They can control a lot of things. And like,
I grew up in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have those.
So while while like realtors say that they'll help you with disclosures, like it's actually just too much reading for someone to do in the amount of time that you were thinking about closing a house.
Enter LLMs.
Yes, exactly. So the first product that I created before Modern Realty, I
Okay.
created this in June of last year, was actually a disclosure summary tool, which just took like the top bullets, as in rental, pet, special assessments upcoming, and threw those into like a digestible email format. You would just email a zip of your disclosures
Oh,
and it would
wow.
email you back a summary. That was very simple.
And did you just make that for yourself?
So it started off for myself, but then I sold it to buyer agents, which is actually how I realized this problem of buyer agents are not incentivized to help buyers.
Yeah, they didn't probably really care very much, did they?
So this is the interesting phenomenon, is that I noticed that buyer agents would be like, oh, cool new tool, I will try. But then as it got better and better, they actually became less and less likely to want to share it with the buyer.
Because it would slow down the transaction timeline, do you think?
Because, no, not slow down, but rather that people would be worried. Okay, you want to like increase the likelihood that the transaction is going to occur,
Close.
not decrease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to just keep them in the dark about the disclosures from the HOA and hope that they don't notice.
Exactly. So this is actually typical for realtors, is that when there is a problem, you just hide the problem.
Sweep it under the rug.
Exactly.
That seems totally normal and fair.
I think this is how
That was sarcasm.
I think this is how realtors work, and it's also just how the system works when you're not incentivized to tell someone the truth, you know? That's why, like, with our web-based tool, we want to have people be able to, like, text the seller agent through our services directly and be able to, like, more so handle the communication. We're not in the loop in the same way, you know? You can, like, look at the disclosure summary yourself. And because this is, like, not nearly as much time spent on our side, and because it's transparent, we're trying to give the best buyer's experience in this way. You're allowed to control your whole transaction through our service.
That's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about the recent lawsuit? Because you mentioned a previous lawsuit, but there is a newer lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. And that lawsuit essentially dictates that the commission payment for a buyer's agent is no longer coming out of the price of the home, like the sale dollar value, like it comes just straight from the buyer. Can you explain what that means?
So I'll explain that a bit more. So first, to rewind all the way back, like, you don't need an agent at all to sell or buy a house on either side. It's not legally required.
Okay.
In California, the only requirement is that when you transact property, it has to go through escrow, which is like an office that simultaneously holds the money and the property and like double checks them both before exchange. So the lawsuit with the DOJ and the National Association of Realtors, NAR, is related to the sellers guaranteeing the buyer commission from the transaction. So basically the seller would be like, my fee is like 5.2% or whatever percent, and then half of that is just allocated to the buyer.
Yes.
Okay. However, the DOJ antitrust case says that you're not allowed to allocate money to the other party. You're only allowed to allocate for the seller agent themselves. Like, the seller agent is not allowed to just leave money for a buyer agent that they don't know yet. So that removes the guarantee for buyer agent commissions from the seller side. And so there are a variety of things that can possibly occur. So I think one of the big possibilities is that people will not leave any buyer commission because it's no longer required. Okay. There's another possibility, which is that they leave a reduced buyer commission. There's another possibility where they leave like the full buyer commission, and it'll be called concessions. Okay. So basically it'll be at the will of the seller to choose how much they want to leave for the concession for the agent. So we're going to observe exactly how much will be left for the buyer agent, like come August 17th. However, a lot of people think it will be less. You know, there's a lot of estimates. I think our business bet is that it will be lower. with some probability.
I have a question that just came to me because we've talked about this lawsuit before.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people are just going to represent buyers less?
As in, will
Like,
people just only be sellers agents and they
Yeah.
don't want to? I think that'll naturally happen.
that's what I
Yeah.
sort of started to think about when you were discussing this.
Mm-hmm.
That over time it'll almost like course correct to the original version of real estate agents, which is only sellers agents,
Mm-hmm.
which would help kind of your case. Seems like a great hypothesis for Modern Realty.
Yeah.
There is no buyer's agent. We're the buyer's agent.
Mm-hmm. I think it is harder for us to automate the seller's agent because the seller agent does a lot of stuff like house furniture staging, photography,
Yes.
and other things that we don't really like. It can't really be replaced with a website.
So I've sold a house before,
Mm-hmm.
and the big thing that my realtor did in representing me was do like a full walkthrough of the property and decide what we needed to update in order to like improve the sale price of the home, which included like
Mhm.
paint and carpet and changing the cabinets and stuff like that. And that was a very specific sort of endeavor, and we had to have a contractor. She had a contractor on hand. Those were all things that we were able to do somewhat quickly in that transaction. That I don't know if you could turn
Right.
that.
So having connections to a lot of people who can pull up to your house
Mhm.
like in short notice, and then knowing how to like make it presentable to other people walking in, I think that is probably like the least friendly toward automation, in that it's
Yeah.
just a lot of high touch in-person
It's
stuff.
certainly services based.
Exactly.
Like you can't.
And the seller is just incentivized the same way as a seller agent to transact high and immediately. And so like there's good incentive alignment, a lot more in-person stuff. And so we're not targeting sell side for right now.
That makes sense. I have another question for you. We talked about this on my podcast, but you mentioned that your current sort of ideal customer is someone who is like a self-starter, wants to own this process. They don't want to have a buyer's agent. They're like keen on learning and doing it themselves, or someone who's sort of done this transaction before and only needs a little bit of help. So first-time home buyers maybe aren't like your ideal customer today. But how do you think what you're building at Modern Realty can sort of assist people that are in pursuit of buying some of the land that's all already owned and becoming a homeowner for the first time?
So actually, the two people that we've closed so far are first-time home buyers.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yes. So something that I'm excited to provide to people is, because like our service is like very responsive, it can answer questions very fast. You know? So how it works is like if people want to ask a question, then through the website, or we can show you a link that like has a lot of explainers about different pieces about the house. You can have that response like immediately, and it's very educational. Whereas if someone were to like agents do a lot of work over text.
Yes.
And also on the phone, but I think like a website actually is a really good way to explain like the buy process to a new person.
Totally. Does your tool hook up to the MLS? For anyone who doesn't know, MLS is basically just like the online database of all properties listed anywhere. So do you have that information, or is it only stuff available from public listings?
It is hooked up with the MLS.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a like subscription to an MLS. So my co-founder Rafi is a realtor.
Oh, word.
And he's an attorney, so we can write any contract. But we have a subscription through him to the MLS, so we can pull that information.
And he's licensed here in California.
In California.
So you have like California properties available, or do you have like a wider selection?
So we help people purchase homes in California.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about buying a home in Colorado or Utah in the next like probably 18 months. Do you think I'd be able to sort of like request special support?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, we've closed 2 places in California, so I think like we will expand to other states. We'll need to see, but I think your odds are good.
Cool, that's exciting. I also know that there are like particular markets where like home buying, and especially people that are like investors that have done this a bunch of times, there are like a handful of places that are super hot for that right now, like Arizona, Ohio.
Yeah, Phoenix has been targeted many, many times for automated home buying or related
Yeah,
because all the homes are so similar
totally.
and all the neighborhoods are so similar. And so people are like, oh, well, there's the
Copy
least
paste.
risk of messing this up.
What do you think about this was not in like my prepared list of questions. What do you think about the iBuyer of it all? Like the open door sort of like purchasing a bunch of homes with a fast turnover at like sort of a median price and then trying to flip them in market. Like what do you think about sort of the state of that stuff right now?
So it's a different business model because essentially you're targeting a seller who doesn't want to go through the time of staging, market timing, fixing, all that stuff to their own house. And you're seeing if you can get those people to sell their house to you at a significant discount.
Right.
So this has been attempted successfully a bunch of times, but also attempted as a failure many times as well, because you actually have to bid significantly under in order for this to make a lot of money. Because Zillow, for an example, they believed their Zestimate too much. I don't know if you know Zillow.
Yeah.
Zillow did a lot of home flipping projects. And so with Zillow, they believed their Zestimate too much and they weren't bidding under enough. Okay. Because like, it's really like, you have to bid under enough. And one of the reasons is because like, if only on 1% of homes, you're bidding like 5-10% over,
Right.
you're going to get that offer
Hemorrhage.
accepted every time.
Yeah.
You know? Whereas like, if all the other ones are 30% under, 0% accepted, you know?
Right.
And so like, you really run a huge risk. And the thing is like, the market is also like hard to predict from hard factors on the MLS. You have to have like even more information.
Correct.
And so people really know to bid very low if they were going to succeed with this method.
Interesting.
Because otherwise you could end up like Zillow or many of the home flippers that don't.
Even open door.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying is that like what I think about it is this is a different product which is appealing to different people, which is sellers that don't want to take time. You know?
Yeah.
Like the seller who values 5% of their house value as less than them spending like 200 hours of time, which you can imagine that is a person.
That is totally a
So-
person. I just like don't understand how someone could think that way, but I do get it.
Sure.
People are they have very valuable time.
Exactly. So they're valuing their time or their laziness. I think the other side is
Perhaps.
like at a very specific amount of value, which they kind of subconsciously calculate, and then they're like, okay, I'll give you my house for like 10% under market.
That's really crazy. We talked about this a little bit earlier, sort of what we think might happen after the lawsuit takes place. But do you think realtors have... Let me rephrase this question. How significant do you think agents will be in the home transacting process? Like if you zoom out, 5-10 years down the line, like do you have an idea of what it might look like in the future?
The buyer agent,
I guess all agents in general, perhaps.
I think, like I've been saying, I think the seller agent is probably here to stay.
Okay.
The buyer agent, I think, will be much less of a role just because, like I've been saying, they're not incentivized with the buyer. And I think that's like the biggest like opportunity is just in this gap.
Sure.
And like, I think in the modern day, as more information becomes available online, you can find out everything on the MLS through Zillow just by looking and like
Right.
going to the place yourself. And people, and this is something unique about the Bay, people will give you the disclosures first, but still you can request disclosures and like read them. You have all the information the buyer agent has yourself, and there are tools and will be tools to allow you to understand all that information. And so I think the buyer agent, the role of the buyer agent will become less over time.
Interesting. You said something earlier that I thought was fascinating before we started filming, where you said agents don't know what the future holds for them. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yes. And so the uncertainty here relates to how people don't know how much concessions the seller is going to provide.
Oh,
That's the gap.
Got it.
Because like you could imagine, because like it's no longer guaranteed when you use a seller agent that the buyer agent fee is guaranteed or commission. You now have a possibility where everybody moves to 0% buyer concessions.
Will that not be in the contract? The dollar amount of concessions, like, would that be a negotiable point, or do you think that sort of?
So it's legally required to be negotiable, and it's not allowed to be in the MLS anymore, which is very annoying and confusing. It means that everybody just has to ask the seller agent, like, what's the amount?
Because it typically, for anyone who doesn't know, it's typically 2 or 3% depending on the
Between 2 and
seller agent.
3%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like almost exclusively you'll see it on the MLS, home listed 2%, home listed 3%. Like, that's basically.
Yeah. So the uncertainty is, like, how much percent are people going to leave now that it's much more in the open? In terms of, like, in the open is the wrong phrase. Now it's much more seller's choice for how much to leave. That is one piece. The other piece is what's going to happen, and this is already actively ongoing, what's going to happen when people just don't abide by the rules? As in, like, if the seller, like, does try and somehow put information out that just has the buyer commission listed, or if they try and, like, make the seller list at a certain price, or if, like, the buyer agent, like, has a buyer sign a contract that's like, hey, if the seller doesn't give me commission, you have to give me commission. Okay.
Do you think
that's something that people are running the risk of when they buy these new buyer contracts, buy with buyer agents that have these new buyer contracts, is the buyer contract will say, like, hey, my commission fee is 2.5%. So that means that if you buy with a house that is not providing that commission, then you need to pay me.
Do you think you could run, like, a lead magnet type of hack that's like, is your realtor scamming you? Like,
so
submit your buyer contract?
All buyer contracts have this information, actually. All buyer contracts say you need to pay me this amount of commission for the house if you buy with me for the next
post
August.
Have they always had that, or
so
just now?
all of the largest real estate brokerages have made their agents sign these contracts to basically guarantee that those agents can get paid.
Got it.
Okay. And so here's another uncertain thing is what happens when someone signs that contract and then they're just like, I don't got money to pay you. The difference is, for a house, you can have the mortgage taken out for the house, and then the seller receives that money, which originated from the mortgage, and then gives some of that money to both agents.
Yeah.
Okay? However, the buyer is not allowed to take out more mortgage to pay a buyer agent directly. Okay. So that means you would have to, like, score a personal loan to pay a buyer agent. It could get messy.
It sounds like it's going to get messy.
Yes.
I mean, the amount of just hustling that people have to do to come up with a down payment in the first place in order to be able to purchase a home, like, say you've saved, $150,000, and that's, like, the best you can do for a down payment.
Yeah.
Call that 20%. You can buy a $600,000 house. JK, you actually have to pay your buyer's agent $20,000 now. So your max down payment's actually $130,000. And now this much inventory you lose out on being able to buy.
Right. Yeah, so that's basically what people suspect will be something of lawsuit, is that, like, what if people can't pay their buyer agent, right? Because that would be a problem then.
Man, I wonder, like, what the sort of, like, noble/moral implications for the seller's agent side. Like, I wonder what that's feeling like. Because some seller's agents are probably going to be like, ooh, give me that 5.2. Like, that's my money. And then some seller's agents are going to be like, thank you for being great in this process. Here's 2%.
Are you talking about, like, some seller agents are just going to
not distribute concessions?
Yeah, so then there's another thing in the realm of legal possibility is, like, the buyer agent could then go ask the seller agent to, like, make more concessions, even though that agreement has already been signed to whatever amount of concessions that they have. So that is also something that might illegally occur.
A ton of illegal stuff happens in real estate transactions already.
Yes.
There's a lot. Everybody knows each other, typically, in, like, one market.
The cartel.
The real estate cartel?
Yes.
Yeah. It's true, though. So, like, there are particular agents that are known to be more favorable that you'd rather work with, or, you know, for example, you're representing a buyer and a seller agent that, you know, always gives 3% compared to 2.2 is selling these homes. You're going to take your clients to those 3 homes first. There's a lot of stuff like that
Steering
takes place. Correct.
Yes. So steering is technically illegal, but common practice, which means that you guide your buyer agents to homes that have high buyer commission.
Yes.
So you can get paid more. It is illegal, but at the same time, it's not actually observable when someone is breaking this law, because like no one is tracking the houses that a specific buyer is touring, nor the agent's tours. Like this is all kind of untracked.
I would just say almost entirely what takes place between an agent and a buyer or an agent and a seller is very hard to observe anyway.
Yeah.
It's like, despite, you know, the obvious like antitrust sort of lawsuits that have come probably many times over the years that have created rules like no steering, you can't really track what an agent is saying to their seller or buyer super closely, and you don't know if they're, you know, doing under the table handshake deals or making promises that are actually like could get them into significant legal trouble. Like that stuff happens all the time.
Right. So back to the goal of Modern Realty and providing a transparent experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that people who are buyers already know how to do the transaction, because a very high fraction of buyers are just going through basically the entire thing themselves and then just getting a realtor for the very end. It's
true. I mean, yeah, I feel like what most people used a realtor for was like private non-open house or like off-market deals. That's a big thing. And then negotiating the final contract and like setting them up with like a preferred title provider.
That's very easy.
Yeah. Like everybody already shows up to a realtor pre-approved for a loan, money ready to spend, knowing what they want almost.
Yeah, I think we are also going to have support soon for off-market purchase, because you can simply just like type in an address of something that you're looking at and then an offer amount, and then we can just automatically send a mailer. That's also how most realtors do like off-market inquiry, is they just send a mailer.
Okay, so for anyone who's wondering what it was like to be an assistant to a realtor in 2015, I would send mailers to people all over the like
I've received area. Those mailers.
And I would run them. Well, first I would tri-fold them on like glossy color paper. Right? There's a headshot of a realtor on there. Into an envelope. I would handwrite addresses for quite a while until I figured out how to use our fax machine. And then once I figured it out, I would feed one by one thousands. I'm talking thousands of envelopes.
Yeah.
To get the address printed. If I did them upside down, oops. Then I would hand stamp each of them in order to send them out. It was a really glamorous part of the job. And I don't remember ever getting a response, but that was like 10 years ago.
Yeah. The pros don't use trifolds. They use an envelope-sized sheet of paper that just has the info printed on the front.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, because then you don't have to open anything. Just by taking it out of your mailbox, you've already seen it.
Oh, it's like a postcard type.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've seen those. I've gotten those in the mail too.
Yeah. So this is where my experience with a Dropship merch store comes into play.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So I use a service called Printful, which basically, you know,
print on demand.
Yeah, exactly.
We use it for like merch.
Yeah, so I use that for my merch.
Every time someone who comes to ARC is having a baby, like who's like a prospect of mine, I send them like a baby onesie, and it has their company logo, then it says future intern on it. And so like I've sent like probably 5 or 6 of those. People love it.
Nice.
They eat that stuff up.
Nice. Yeah, but my familiarity with Dropship, you know, I know how to set this up to like do mailers. And mailers is very easy.
Have you heard of Goliath Data? It's a new company that just went through Better Tomorrow Ventures Accelerator, but it's basically like off-market deal database. Their names are Austin and Max. They're both ex-architects. So I'm happy to introduce them to you if you want to collab.
Sure. Probably compete, but
I don't think so. Unless
so wait, they're just data, so they don't actually do off-market purchase.
No, it's just data.
Okay, then maybe collab.
I can peep if they're ever thinking about transacting, but
Yeah.
they're pretty they're doing quite well, I think. It'd be cool.
Yeah, I think that there's a variety of people that want to introduce me to someone doing the exact same thing. Like the AI
Oh, yeah.
realtor has been attempted easily over 1,000 times. Like, and then it's just like if I am talking to someone who's doing the exact same thing as me, the competition usually does not lend to like good collaboration.
No, I would not want I don't think it would make sense for you to talk to those people
Yeah.
also. Like it's so easy to accidentally reveal like a edge,
Mm-hmm.
which is also one of the hard parts about building in public on like the AI application level. Like, you know, you're posting all this content, we're having this conversation, there are
Yeah.
tons of things that you guys have built. I mean, I guess if anyone really wanted to know, they could just like use the product.
Right.
But it's so easy to reveal something that maybe someone else hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
And so like I get that. I would not introduce you to
So
someone else.
the public facing features are all known, but in terms of like the engineering behind it, it's kind of difficult to discover that piece.
That's good.
So like all of our like reading in terms of like reading disclosures, business related like prompts of how to talk to people and remembering like what they say and stuff like that, that I don't really know how someone would easily pick up.
Sure.
So yeah,
You're
that,
safe.
that is the stuff that took the most time.
You're obviously, you know, going through Y Combinator, you're building a startup for the first time.
Not the first time.
Not the first time.
No. I've had this
I
is
didn't know.
this is my third product.
Okay, third product,
Yeah.
first venture backed
First
startup.
venture back startup, yeah.
Okay. So you're building a venture backed startup for the first time.
There you go.
You're playing in the big leagues now.
A little bit.
YC is like the minor leagues.
Uh-huh.
But like demo day is basically like your first swing at like big league stuff
Mhm.
in theory. What do you want this to become? Like what's like the ultra large like me and Rafi become a billion dollar company? Like what's that vision look like?
I think we are passionate about our worldview of improving the property transaction process because we both purchased homes fairly recently and think that the process could definitely be improved for the buyer.
Sure.
So I think what's driving us is this worldview. You know, the $1 billion, if it comes, it's nice. You know, that's whatever. I think like being driven towards solving this specific problem though is what makes us excited about it because both of us started working on this and not making any money on it for Rafi's been working on it since October and me since June of last year. So I was not paid any money until May of this year, and then Rafi the same thing. So like we've both been working on it for a long time with
Yeah.
no pay just because we're really committed to the idea.
That is a very investable quality. If any of you write checks to startups, it's a really good thing to hear. So many people are very obsessed with their product or sort of like the solution that they believe is the right solution, but it sounds like the motivation for you and Rafi is the home buying experience is bad. We can make it significantly better.
Yeah, I think this is fairly typical for like B2C founders is that people who make consumer products like are really passionate about their own demand for this product.
Totally.
And so that is very similar. between
So
the
many
same buyer.
origin stories of consumer founders is I had this experience. It sucked. I wanted to fix it. Like so it's like I've heard that so many times.
Exactly. So I think that's what like makes us aligned in that we both hated our experience, like just from a high level.
Even though you liked your realtor?
Even though I liked my realtor personally,
Oh.
you know, just the concept of like needing to have a realtor to like do this transaction
Right.
and the realtor's like not incentivized with me, I think it's like off put me.
That makes sense. Because did you feel rushed in the process of home buying?
So I had a unique buying experience in 22 in that my fiance like got her green card process started.
Okay.
And so we knew we had to stay in the Bay for like 3 to 4 years because
you
it's
can't
so
leave.
backlogged.
You can't leave the country, basically.
Yeah. So we knew we needed to stay, and also it was like being applied through her work. So like we knew we needed to stay for a while because it's like it takes a super long time. They're like minimum 18 months, but like realistically, I think it's longer than that. So we knew we needed to stay, and also our rent, we were paying like 5K a month in rent. So like we knew we needed to decide in the next like month and a half, because like that's when we were going to need to like rent another place. So we had significant financial incentive to buy pretty fast.
Got it.
So we had a very atypical buy experience just because of that. Because most people, like agents will tell you this, if you have a good agent lead, then they'll close like over 18 months. You know, like you're really looking at a long time horizon before.
Really?
Yeah.
In the Bay Area?
Just generally, in most places, like buyer agents notice that people, like most of them who do buy with you don't buy like in 30 weeks or whatever. You know, it's not something that's like that short of a time.
Interesting. I wonder how that changes regionally, because I've witnessed at least, I guess maybe not. Like all of the people that I know that are like millennial home buyers, either like first or second time home buyers, it does take them quite a while to close.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a sign of the times, but 10 years ago, at least where I grew up, which is a much smaller town, much lower median income and much lower median home price, it was under 3 to 5 months, I would say. It was pretty fast.
Were you meeting people top of funnel?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Still 3 to 5 months is still like fairly, that's like,
It's shorter.
It's quite a while. Yeah.
It's way shorter than 18.
Yeah.
It takes like 90, it takes 90 days to buy a house and then it takes 90 days to close.
Yeah. I think in the Bay too, it's very challenging because like, if you have people with specific interests, like it's not as bad in San Francisco, but in South Bay, the average house that does sell will be on market for 8 days. So it's like, if you didn't just bid $1 zillion over list price, then these people are just going to go back into lurking. So like as a buyer agent, it's very challenging because like these people like are super interested in a place and then they don't get it because no one gets it because like there's like 20 bids or whatever. And then this like family or person goes back into lurking for like an indefinite amount of time, you know?
That is something that I feel has really taken off post pandemic era. Like the
single family homes.
The single family home, like 20, 50, 60% over asking price.
Yeah.
Also the number of all cash offers, which if you care about home buying, is crazy. It's actually crazy talk. I don't know somebody with $5 million in liquidity just hanging around to put an all cash offer in a house in San Jose. I don't know who those people are. It's happening.
Yeah.
Like every day.
It's people who work at their desk and they're not hanging out and then they go buy the house. It's a very like software engineer focused crowd in South Bay. You know?
I think it's dumb. Like I think we've like allowed the prices of those homes to get too high.
Yeah.
Like for example, so the public high schools in Fremont, California are really, really good. But Fremont is like a fine place to live. No offense if you live there, but it's like nothing special. But
she hates Fremont.
I do. It stinks. Like literally smells. But the price of home in Fremont, like, well exceeds what it should be, given its location and what it has to offer, simply because the schools are so good. And so like you have people buying very, very expensive houses, oftentimes homes that are out of their price range, in order for their children to attend school for free. And I don't think that makes any sense.
Well, what's your familiarity with home zoning?
Not as high as it could be.
Okay. Well, here's something that I've kind of learned through the process, even though this is now quite far in relation to Modern Realty. This is just like my observation of what people complain about in terms of home price.
Yeah.
And, like possible solutions, but the Bay Area has some of the most aggressive zoning laws in the United States.
Okay, tell me.
As in, for an example, San Jose has the highest fraction of land allotted to single-family homes. Single-family homes that you can only build a house on 1/3 of your yard, and then also that house that you're building on 1/3 of your yard needs additional approvals if it is over 1 story.
Like on the lot size.
Yeah.
It can only be 1/3.
1/3.
That doesn't seem like enough.
So most areas in the U.S., like not only can you build on a higher fraction than 1/3, but you can also build vertically. Right. But in San Jose, it's like you can only build 1/3, and you're constrained both in area and you're constrained in height. Okay, so it's like very aggressive constraints around like all of San Jose being single family zoned.
That's really weird. Is the vertical zoning newer? Do you know anything about this?
So this is kind of historic, but also it hasn't changed because the property values in the Bay are like rising so fast.
Yeah.
And so everybody has this incentive of like, oh, if we just hold on to like building more, then our own property values are going to keep increasing, which is like kind of the issue with like people's home property being like such a high fraction of their net worth, because it's not the way in like most developed nations. People's like net worth is not so tied into their home value, so they're more willing to like allow developments to improve the overall city.
Yeah, that's really crazy. I mean, the like more housing does like attend sort of like reduce overall home price, but it also like reduces overall market suffering.
It's a little bit of like a prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, it is actually.
Because like, okay, if you have this specific house and then the adjacent lot to you suddenly has a 1,000 unit apartment complex, okay, your value will go down, okay, because like there's now much more supply in the immediate vicinity. However, if everybody decided to just make this place a big city, then your property value would actually go up.
Correct.
Right? But if everybody is just thinking like of the hyper local, like one-off decision-making point, then there kind of just is this incentive for everybody to just lock in together and be like, we're not building anything anywhere.
So in the case of San Jose NIMBYism, this is probably like not related to anything you'll put on the internet, but maybe just in case if anyone is wondering, there is a train line called the VAT that runs in San Jose, AVT?
I've actually never taken the Caltrain, embarrassingly.
That's okay. I used to live in Santa Clara. That's the only reason why I know any of this.
Yeah.
But there's a train that goes to like the SAP Center where the Levi Stadium is. There is like a quarter mile section that could extend it to take it to the Caltrain station.
Yeah.
So people could take the Caltrain to the San Jose local train that would then take them to places like Levi Stadium, the SAP Center, downtown San Jose. That would bring in a significantly higher number of like out of town visitors to then like improve the commerce of their whole city that the people in San Jose will not approve, despite having already constructed like a portion of the efforts to build the tracks. The NIMBYs are now saying, no, don't finish it. We don't want them here. Despite it already being halfway done and like allotted to that space.
Yeah.
Because I guess they don't want it to become a bigger city, although San Jose is like top 10 biggest metropolises in America. So crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the incentives are not aligned for them to allow for easier access to their land. Yes. Also, like, there is very strong racism too, related to transport leading from other places into your own.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I used to live in Westwood, which is where UCLA is, and if anyone's familiar with the LA Metro, it is the stupidest public transit system ever because it only runs between like maybe 15% of like the greater Los Angeles area. And it took over 10 years of lobbying to get the LA and Westwood City Council to approve the Purple Line, which goes through Westwood from like downtown and East LA, which will allow people in the working class to commute across town more easily without having to drive in several hours of traffic. And they did not want it because they did not want people coming to their like nice, expensive neighborhood to work in the largest hospital in the US entirely. They were like, no, doesn't make sense.
It really requires people to act with the presumption that everyone else is also pro their city as opposed to just their own property value, right? Like you actually have to behave with the group in mind as opposed to like your own specific financial incentive, which is difficult because people don't, because if you're the only one that is like allowing like a 1,000 unit apartment complex in your neighborhood, but then no one else is like down for large apartment complexes in their neighborhood, then you will kind of bear the brunt of the cost,
Yeah.
of additional supply in your neighborhood. So,
Interesting.
like, everybody has to kind of collectively vote to go do this.
The rise of individualism is destroying the American economy.
Mm-hmm.
Bar. In Belvedere, which is in Marin County, which is like on this lagoon. It's very fancy.
I've been to Marin, so I feel like
Yeah, so
I
Belvedere
get
is in
why.
Marin. It is like a little sort of like strip of land island thing. It's surrounded by water on both sides. Almost every house has like a water feature, water access,
Mm-hmm.
and views of the bay in some direction. On Belvedere, they are building like three like tall-ish condo buildings, and it took over 30 years for that development to like see the light of day and approval for construction because the homeowners in Belvedere were like so upset about like affordable, and when I say affordable I mean like $1 million a unit,
Mm-hmm.
housing coming to the lagoon. But it's going to allow people to like teach at the schools in Belvedere in Tiburon and be employed to the city, like the police department, the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
Like what it does will improve the overall experience, but they had to like it took them a long time to believe that it would, which I
Yeah.
think is like what you were saying. Like everyone has to believe that it's like for the betterment of the city in order for us like we must do this.
Yeah.
But if you don't think that, then you're not going to let it fly.
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue with this specific piece of individualism is like people need to have their local government go and do something that might be against like the individual in the short term. The United States has some of the strongest property laws of countries. Property rights are guaranteed in the Constitution, and like not even all people had rights in the Constitution. Like, but property had rights in the Constitution.
When you go to law school, one of the first classes you take is property law.
Yeah.
It's like one of the first things, and
I
basically
heard it
everyone
sucks.
everyone I know who's become an attorney always says like what they learned from that class. It's a big bug. What they learned from that class is if you want to succeed in America and like ensure your like political and financial safety, own land.
Yeah.
Like that's what everybody says.
Yes.
But it's become increasingly harder to own land.
Yes. But then, yeah, everybody wants the same finite amount of land, but there are more and more people on Earth. And also, like, yeah, more and more people in the United States. Like, everybody's demand on resources is also increasing. Like, everything is kind of like coming to a point where, like, it would make sense for property values to increase this much quicker.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah. Do you want to wrap?
Yeah, that was great. There's probably so much good stuff in there.